The cameras outside were flashing, but inside the courtroom, the only thing I saw was my stepmother's cold, familiar smirk. She still believed the lie she told 15 years ago, that I was just a failure who made things up. She did not realize the frail woman sitting in the back row, breathing with an oxygen tank, was the witness she thought she had silenced. The teacher who came to our house that winter night had finally returned to speak. My name is Mackenzie Perry. I am 34 years old, and I am a senior data analyst at Lakeview Insight Group in Cleveland, Ohio. My job is to find patterns in chaos, to look at rows of jagged numbers and find the story hidden beneath them. Numbers are clean. Numbers do not lie. Numbers do not smile at you while they ruin your life. But today, I was not analyzing market trends or risk assessments. I was sitting at the plaintiff's table in a district courtroom that smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety, watching my own life being dissected on a projection screen. The air in the room was thick, heavy with the murmurs of the gallery and the aggressive clicking of camera shutters from the press pool allowed inside. Outside the double doors, I knew it was worse. The hallway was a gauntlet of microphones and flashing lights. I had seen the chyron on the lobby television screen as I walked in. The bright red letters scrolling across the bottom, stepmother and father, accused of transcript fraud and federal fund embezzlement. It looked like a headline about someone else. It looked like a Lifetime movie plot. But the woman sitting 20 feet away from me was not an actress. She was Lorna West. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere suit that probably cost $2,000, her blonde hair coiffed into a perfect, immovable helmet of respectability. Next to her sat my father, Richard West. He looked older than I remembered, his face lined with a stress that I desperately hoped was guilt, though I knew better. They sat with their expensive legal team, a phalanx of dark suits designed to intimidate. Lorna turned her head slightly. It was a subtle movement, barely catching the light, but her eyes locked onto mine. There it was, that same cold, dismissive glint I had seen over the dinner table for half my life. It was a look that said, "You are nothing. You are a bug I forgot to crush." Even here, facing federal charges, she looked at me with the absolute confidence of a predator who has never gone hungry. I forced myself to look away, my hands trembling slightly beneath the mahogany table. I clasped them together, squeezing until my knuckles turned white. "Don't let them see you flinch," a voice whispered beside me. I looked up at Ava Reynolds. Ava was the federal prosecutor assigned to the case, and she was terrifying in the best possible way. She had sharp features and eyes that seemed to cut through pretense like a diamond cutter through glass. She had taken this case not because she cared about family drama, but because she had found the trail of money, specifically federal money, loans and scholarships that involved interstate wire transfers and federal oversight. That made this her jurisdiction, and Ava Reynolds did not like people messing with her jurisdiction. "I am okay," I whispered back, though my voice felt thin. "You are more than okay, Mackenzie," Ava said, shuffling a stack of files with precise, lethal movements. "You are the one holding the match. Look at them. They are terrified. That isn't arrogance on Lorna's face. It is a mask." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the voice in my head was loud today. It was Lorna's voice, echoing from 15 years ago. "No one will believe you. Your transcripts, your future, they are all in my hands." The courtroom was filling up. I could hear the rustle of coats and the low hum of conversation. People loved a scandal. They loved the idea of a wealthy, prominent family from the suburbs tearing itself apart. But amidst the sea of strangers, reporters, and legal aides, my eyes caught something in the back row that made my breath hitch in my throat. It was a woman sitting near the aisle. She was incredibly thin, her frame seemingly swallowed by a heavy wool coat. A clear plastic tube ran under her nose, connected to a portable oxygen tank resting at her feet. Her hair was entirely white now, thinning and wispy, but I knew those eyes. I knew the way she held her hands in her lap, fingers interlaced. Sylvia Carver, my old high school English teacher, the woman who had come to the house. I had not seen her since that winter. I had assumed she was gone, or that she had moved away, or simply that she had forgotten the girl who stopped turning in essays. Seeing her there, frail and hooked up to a machine to help her breathe, hit me harder than Lorna's glare. She had come, she was sick, she was dying, and yet she had dragged herself into this courtroom for me. Sylvia caught me staring and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was the same look she used to give me when I got an answer right in class. A look of quiet validation. I see you, Mackenzie. All rise, the bailiff bellowed, his voice bouncing off the high ceiling. The Honorable Judge Marcus Thorne entered the room. He was a man with a face carved from granite, known for his intolerance of theatrics. He took his seat, the heavy black robe settling around him like storm clouds. The room descended into a hush that felt electrical. We are here for the matter of the United States versus Richard and Lorna West, Judge Thorne said. His voice was a deep baritone that demanded absolute attention. The defendants are charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, falsification of educational records, misappropriation of a trust, and gross abuse of an adult dependent. Hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that the paperwork never could. Abuse of an adult dependent. That was the phrase that made the reporters lean forward. It was the phrase that stripped away the excuse of parental discipline. The prosecution alleges, the judge continued, summarizing the docket, that the defendants systematically altered the academic records of the plaintiff, Ms. Perry, concealed federal scholarship offers, and diverted funds from a trust specifically designated for her education to their own accounts and the accounts of another sibling. Furthermore, these financial crimes were allegedly covered up through a pattern of physical intimidation and psychological manipulation. The words hung in the air. Stepmother beat me, hid my report cards. Teacher came to the house. It sounded like the plot of a gothic horror novel, but it was my life. It was the reason I had spent my 20s thinking I was stupid. It was the reason I had scrubbed floors and waited tables while my stepbrother went to a private university on my money. I looked over at the defense table. Their lead attorney was Gregory Hales, a man whose smile looked like it had been bought from a catalog of sharks. He stood up to make his opening remarks, buttoning his suit jacket with a flourish. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Hales began, his voice smooth and rich like expensive bourbon. He walked toward the jury box, making eye contact with each member. We are going to hear a very dramatic story today. You are going to hear about villains and victims. You are going to hear about wicked stepmothers and suppressed geniuses. He paused, turning to point a finger directly at me. It felt like a physical blow. But the evidence will show that this is nothing more than the bitterness of an estranged daughter, Hales said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried to the back of the room. This is not a case about fraud. This is a case about a young woman who failed to launch, who could not handle the rigors of higher education, and who has spent the last 15 years rewriting history to blame the parents who tried to support her. This is merely the imagination of a failed daughter looking for a payday. The gallery murmured. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a burning mix of shame and rage. A failed daughter, the label they had slapped on me when I was 19. The label Lorna had whispered in my ear while she squeezed my arm until it bruised. Ava leaned in close to me, her shoulder pressing against mine. Let him talk, she whispered fiercely. He is digging their grave. Today, we do not just talk about the money. Mackenzie, we talk about how they broke you. We talk about how they hid your entire life behind a few sheets of paper. I looked at the judge. I looked at the camera zooming in on my face, looking for a crack, looking for a tear. I looked back at Sylvia in the last row, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest as the oxygen machine hissed rhythmically. They wanted me to be the victim. They wanted me to be the sad little girl who got slapped. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was a data analyst. I dealt in facts. And the facts were sitting in boxes of evidence that Ava Reynolds was about to unleash. I looked down at the table. My hand was gripping a pen so hard that the plastic barrel was starting to bend. It was a cheap blue ballpoint pen, the kind you buy in bulk. Suddenly, the shiny varnish of the courtroom table seemed to dissolve. The murmurs of the crowd faded into the sound of wind howling against a window pane. The smell of floor wax was replaced by the smell of pot roast and fear. I was not 34 anymore. I was not a senior analyst. I was sitting at a different table, a kitchen table. The wood was oak, not mahogany. Outside, the Cleveland winter was burying the world in white silence. It was dark. My hands were not holding a pen. They were holding a thick envelope from a university I had dreamed of attending since I was 12. The memory pulled me backward with the force of a riptide, dragging me out of the safety of the courtroom and dropping me right back into the night where the first lie was told. The night the door locked, and the teacher came to the house. I was 19 years old, and my name was Mackenzie Perry, though back then, that name felt less like an identity and more like an apology I had to make every time I walked into a room. The winter of 2009 in Cleveland was brutal. The snow did not fall softly. It came down in hard, icy sheets that turned the roads into gray slush and froze the breath in your lungs the moment you stepped outside. I remember the cold vividly because I did not own a proper car. I took the bus from the community college to the coffee shop where I worked, and then I walked the last 6 blocks to the house that my father, Richard, had bought with his new wife, Lorna. I was a student at the local community college, a place Lorna liked to refer to as the 13th grade whenever she wanted to remind me of my station in life. But that afternoon, the cold wind biting at my cheeks could not touch me. Inside my backpack, tucked between a used textbook on macroeconomics and my grease-stained apron, was a thick manila envelope. It was my ticket out. I had finished my first year with a 4.0 grade point average. The envelope contained my official transcripts and, more importantly, a transfer offer from a major state university 2 hours away. I had not opened the inner letter yet. I wanted to do it with my father, but the guidance counselor had winked at me and told me that based on my financial need and academic standing, the package was likely going to cover almost everything. For the first time in 3 years, since my mother passed and Richard married Lorna, I felt light. I felt like I was not just surviving, but actually living. I walked up the driveway of the 2-story colonial house, rehearsals of what I would say playing in my head. Dad, look, I did it. I am not a leech. I am going somewhere. The house was warm when I stepped inside, smelling of rosemary chicken and lemon polish. It was a perfect house, not a speck of dust, not a shoe out of place. It was Lorna's stage, and we were just props she moved around to make herself look like the benevolent matriarch. Is that you, Mackenzie? Lorna's voice drifted from the dining room. It was not a question. It was an inspection. Yes, it is me, I called back, kicking off my wet boots on the designated rubber mat. Is Dad home? Your father is working late. The development project in Westlake is behind schedule. Lorna appeared in the hallway. She was 42 then, a woman who treated aging like a lawsuit she intended to win. Her hair was perfectly smooth, her blouse crisp. She looked at my wet coat and the backpack I was clutching to my chest with a mixture of boredom and disdain. Dinner is on the table. Try not to drip slush everywhere. My heart sank. I needed Richard there. Richard was weak, often bending to Lorna's will to keep the peace, but he was still my father. He would have been proud. Lorna, on the other hand, viewed my existence as a line item on an expense report she wanted to cut. I washed my hands and sat at the dining table. The silence was thick. Lorna cut her chicken with surgical precision. You are late, she said, not looking up. The bus was slow because of the ice, I said. I hesitated, then reached into my bag. I could not wait. The excitement was burning a hole in my chest. I got my grades today, Lorna, and a letter from the university. I placed the heavy envelope on the polished oak table between us. It looked out of place among the fine china, a gritty piece of reality invading her curated world. Lorna stopped chewing. She set her fork down slowly. Her eyes flicked to the envelope, then to me. It was the way a bomb disposal expert looks at a suspicious package, calculating the damage it could do. Is that so? She said softly. I have a 4.0, I said. my voice shaking slightly. "The counselor said I am eligible for the transfer scholarship. It means I can move on campus next semester. I won't have to commute. I won't have to ask you or Dad for anything." I thought that part would appeal to her. The idea of me leaving, of me costing them $0. Lorna reached out. Her manicured fingers, tipped in French white, walked across the table and snatched the envelope. "Let us see," she said. She ripped open the seal. It was not a gentle motion. She tore through the paper with a sudden, violent efficiency. She pulled out the transcripts and the thick letter on the university letterhead. I watched her face, waiting for a flicker of surprise, maybe even begrudging respect. Instead, her expression flattened. She scanned the lines of text, her eyes narrowing. Then, a small, terrifying smile curled the corner of her lips. It was a pitying smile. "Oh, Mackenzie," she sighed, shaking her head. "You poor, deluded girl." "What?" I asked. "What does it say?" "You didn't actually think this was an acceptance, did you?" She tossed the papers onto her plate, right on top of the rosemary chicken sauce. "It is an offer," I said, reaching for them. The counselor said, "The counselor was being nice to you," Lorna snapped, pulling the plate away. "This says your credits don't transfer. It says your grades are inflated because you went to a community college. It says if you want to go there, you have to pay full tuition, out-of-state rates." "That is not true," I said, confusion swarming my brain. "That is a state school. I live here, and my grades are perfect." "Your grades are mediocre," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Just like your mother's were, just like you are. If Richard saw this, if he saw how you got his hopes up just to fail him again, he would be humiliated. He is already so stressed about money. Mackenzie, do you want to kill him? Do you want to be the reason he has a heart attack?" "Let me see it," I said, standing up. "I haven't even read it yet. Give it to me." "Sit down," she commanded. "No, give me my mail." I reached for the damp papers. Lorna moved faster than I expected. She stood up, her chair screeching against the hardwood, and shoved me. It was not a playful push. She drove the heels of her hands into my shoulders with shocking force. I stumbled back, my socks slipping on the polished floor, and slammed hard into the wall behind me. The impact knocked the wind out of me. A picture frame above my head rattled and crashed to the floor, the glass shattering. "You clumsy, ungrateful little brat!" Lorna screamed. "You pushed me," I gasped, clutching my shoulder. "I did no such thing. You are hysterical." She advanced on me. I tried to move sideways, but she grabbed my arm. Her fingers were like iron bands, digging into the soft flesh of my upper arm, right where the bicep meets the bone. She squeezed, twisting the skin. "Let go," I cried out. I was 19 years old. I was an adult. But in that kitchen, with her looming over me, I felt 5 years old and helpless. She slapped me. It was a sharp, stinging crack across my face that made my ear ring. Then she slapped me again, harder, the back of her hand catching my cheekbone. "You are nothing," she spat, her face inches from mine. "You are a leech. You work at a coffee shop and you think you are special? You think you are going to university? You are going nowhere. You are going to stay here and pay rent until you rot." "I am calling the police," I sobbed, trying to wrench my arm free. The pain in my arm was searing. I knew instantly it would bruise. Lorna laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Go ahead. Call them. Tell them your stepmother was trying to calm you down because you were throwing a tantrum about your grades. Tell them you broke the picture frame. Who do you think they will believe? Mackenzie, the wife of a respected developer, or the 19-year-old barista who just failed to get into college?" She leaned in closer, her perfume suffocating me. "You are an adult now, Mackenzie," she whispered. "This isn't child abuse. This is a domestic dispute. And in this house, you are the unstable one. They will just call you a failure." I stopped fighting. I went limp against the wall, tears streaming down my face. That was her power. She knew exactly where the cracks in my self-esteem were, and she drove a wedge right into them. Suddenly, the phone on the kitchen counter began to ring. Lorna released my arm instantly. She smoothed her blouse, took a deep breath, and picked up the handset. "Hello, darling?" Her voice transformed instantly. It was sweet, concerned, dripping with honey. "Oh, Richard, I am so glad you called. No, everything is fine. Well, actually, Mackenzie is having a bit of an episode. Yes, again. She got some bad news about school and she just started throwing things. She broke the picture in the hallway. No, I am fine. I am just trying to calm her down. She is very emotional." I slid down the wall to the floor. Hugging my knees, I looked at the table. The scholarship letter, the one I had not even read, was sitting there, stained with grease. Lorna hung up the phone. She looked at me, her face returning to that mask of cold indifference. She walked over to the table, picked up the envelope, the transcripts, and the letter. "Where are you taking those?" I whispered. "Somewhere safe," she said, "where you can't use them to embarrass us." She walked out of the kitchen and into my father's study. I heard the heavy click of the deadbolt on the oak door, followed by the metallic rasp of the filing cabinet key. That cabinet was where my father kept the deeds, the bonds, and the paperwork for the trust fund my grandfather, Benjamin, had left for my education, a trust fund of $400,000 that I was supposed to access when I turned 21. I sat on the floor among the broken glass for a long time. My face throbbed. My arm was already swelling. 5 distinct finger marks darkening into a deep purple bruise against my pale skin. Eventually, I stood up. I cleaned up the glass because I knew if I did not, she would tell Richard I left it there as a threat. I went to my room and locked the door. Though the lock was flimsy and we both knew it, I curled up on my bed and stared at the ceiling. I replayed the scene over and over. Why didn't I hit her back? Why didn't I run out the door? But abuse is not a logical puzzle. It is a cage, and Lorna had just reinforced the bars. The next morning, I woke up with a headache that felt like a nail driven between my eyes. I put on a long-sleeved turtleneck to hide the bruises on my arm and applied concealer to the red mark on my cheek. I went to the college administrative office before my first class. I had to know. Maybe Lorna was right. Maybe I had misread everything. "I need a copy of my transfer offer," I told the secretary, my voice small. "My copy at home got damaged." The secretary, a kind woman with reading glasses on a chain, tapped at her computer. She frowned. "I am sorry, Mackenzie," she said. "The system shows the offer was generated, but the hard file is missing from your student folder, and that is odd. There is a note here from yesterday evening saying the application was withdrawn by the student." "Withdrawn?" I gripped the counter. "I didn't withdraw it." "It says here a call came in," she said, looking confused. Maybe it was a mistake? But without the hard copy signed and returned, and with this withdrawal note, the spot has been released to the wait list. The deadline was this morning at 9 o'clock. It was 9:15. Lorna had not just hidden the papers. She had called. She had impersonated me. Or maybe she had just called as my guardian and pulled the plug. "I see," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. "Thank you." I walked out of the office. The hallway was crowded with students laughing, complaining about assignments, planning their weekends. They looked so young. I felt ancient. I felt heavy. The shame was a physical weight on my shoulders. I had failed. I had let her win. I was exactly what she said I was, a girl with big dreams and no reality. I kept my head down, clutching my books to my chest, trying to make myself invisible. My left arm throbbed where she had grabbed me. Every pulse was a reminder. You are owned. You are trapped. I turned the corner toward the English wing, desperate to get to the bathroom so I could cry in peace. "Mackenzie?" The voice was soft, inquisitive. I froze. I looked up. Standing by the door of room 304 was Sylvia Carver. She was my English literature professor, a woman who loved Emily Dickinson and wore oversized cardigans. She was one of the few teachers who actually looked at me when I spoke. She had written Brilliant insight on my last essay about Hamlet. I tried to force a smile, but I knew it looked fractured. Hi, Mrs. Carver. She did not smile back. Her eyes, intelligent and sharp behind her wire-rimmed glasses, dropped to my arm. I realized too late that in my distress, I had let my grip loosen. The sleeve of my turtleneck had ridden up just an inch, just enough to show the bottom edge of a dark, ugly purple bruise in the shape of a thumb. I yanked my sleeve down instantly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I am late for class, I stammered. Mackenzie, she said. She stepped forward, blocking my path gently. She did not look at my books. She looked right into my eyes, and for a second, I saw something I had not seen in years. Concern? Real, terrifying concern. Are you all right? She asked. You look different. I am fine, I lied, backing away. Just tired. I have to go. I hurried past her, keeping my head down, but I could feel her eyes on my back. I could feel her question hanging in the air. Most people looked away when they saw pain. They didn't want the burden of knowing, but Sylvia Carver did not look away. And that, I would learn later, was the most dangerous thing she could have done. The weeks that followed the incident in the kitchen were a blur of gray static. I became a ghost in my own life. I stopped raising my hand in class. I stopped lingering in the cafeteria to talk to the few friends I had managed to make. I walked through the corridors of the community college with my head down, shoulders hunched, trying to occupy as little space as possible. It is a specific kind of invisibility that you cultivate when you are living in a war zone. You learn that being noticed is dangerous, so you try to fade into the drywall. But Sylvia Carver noticed. She was not the type of teacher who just lectured and left. She was an observer. She watched me slide into my seat at the back of the lecture hall 5 minutes late, day after day, my eyes rimmed with red from crying myself to sleep. She watched my grades, which had been perfect, start to slip. I missed an essay deadline, then I missed a quiz. One Tuesday afternoon in late February, as the rest of the students were shuffling out of the room, zipped into their parkas against the biting Cleveland wind, Mrs. Carver stood by the door. She did not let me slip past. Mackenzie, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it had a gravity that stopped me. A word, please. My stomach dropped. I clutched my backpack straps tighter. I am sorry about the essay. Mrs. Carver, I have been busy with work. Come to the faculty lounge, she said. It was not a request. The lounge smelled of stale coffee and photocopier toner. It was empty at this hour. Mrs. Carver motioned for me to sit on a lumpy orange sofa while she pulled up a chair. She sat close enough that I could smell the peppermint tea in her mug. You have been late 4 times this week, she said, her eyes searching my face. You haven't participated in discussion once, and based on the withdrawal notice I saw in the system regarding your transfer application, something significant has changed. You were excited about university. Mackenzie, you were talking about pre-law. What happened? I stared at my boots. The rubber was cracked near the toe. I changed my mind, I mumbled. I don't think I am ready for university. It is too expensive. My parents, they don't think it is a good investment. Your parents? Mrs. Carver frowned. Or your stepmother? I flinched. The reaction was involuntary, a small spasm in my shoulders, but she saw it. My father agrees with her, I said quickly. There are arguments. It is complicated. The mail from the school didn't come, and then it was too late, and we just decided it was better if I stayed home and worked. The mail didn't come? She repeated the words slowly, testing the weight of them. Or the mail was intercepted? I have to go, I said, panic rising in my throat. I stood up too fast. As I reached for my bag, the sleeve of my oversized sweater snagged on the arm of the chair and pulled up. I saw her eyes widen. The bruise on my wrist had turned a sickly yellow-green, but the newer one, higher up on my forearm where Lorna had grabbed me 2 nights ago for forgetting to wash a wine glass, was fresh and purple. It looked like a bracelet of violence. I yanked the sleeve down, my face burning. Mackenzie, Mrs. Carver breathed. She reached out, but I pulled away. Who did that to you? I fell, I said. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I fell down the stairs. I am clumsy. Ask anyone. That is a grab mark, she said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. That is a handprint. Is it your stepmother? No, please, just leave it alone. I backed toward the door. I am fine. Everything is fine. I tripped. I ran out of the lounge before she could say another word, but as I hurried to the bus stop, shivering in the cold, I knew I had not convinced her. I had done the opposite. I had confirmed her worst fears. 2 days later, the doorbell rang. It was 7 in the evening, the sky was pitch black, and the house was quiet. Richard was in the living room watching the financial news, and Lorna was in the kitchen, arranging flowers in a crystal vase. I was upstairs, trying to study, when the chime echoed through the house. Lorna frowned. Who on earth is visiting at this hour? She wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the door. I crept to the top of the stairs, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I heard the lock click, the door open, and then a voice that made my blood freeze. Good evening. I apologize for the intrusion. I am Sylvia Carver, Mackenzie's English professor. I gripped the banister. No. Teachers did not come to houses, not for college students, not in the real world. This was a disaster. Oh? Lorna's voice was smooth, polite, but I could hear the edge of steel underneath. Is something wrong? Is Mackenzie in trouble? I was hoping to speak with you and Mr. West briefly, Mrs. Carver said, regarding Mackenzie's academic progress and some concerning barriers to her scholarship opportunities. Lorna paused. I could imagine the calculations running through her mind. She could slam the door, but that would look suspicious. She had to play the game. Of course, Lorna said, stepping back. Please, come in. Richard, we have a guest. I had no choice. I walked down the stairs, my legs feeling like lead. When I reached the bottom step, I saw Mrs. Carver standing in the foyer, clutching her handbag. She looked small in our cavernous entryway, but her chin was set with determination. When she saw me, her expression softened into something heartbreakingly kind. Hello, Mackenzie, she said. I could not speak. I just nodded, my eyes wide with terror. Lorna was standing right behind her, smiling. It was her perfect hostess smile, the one that never reached her eyes. Come into the dining room, Lorna said, guiding Mrs. E. Carver with a hand that hovered just above her back without touching. Can I get you some tea or coffee? Tea would be fine, Mrs. Carver said. We sat at the long mahogany table. Richard joined us, looking confused and slightly annoyed at being pulled away from his program. He shook Mrs. Carver's hand absently. So, Richard said, sitting at the head of the table. Mackenzie is failing, is that it? Not at all, Mrs. Carver said. She sat very straight. Mackenzie is one of the brightest students I have encountered in 20 years. That is why I am here. There seems to be a disconnect regarding her transfer to the university. She had a scholarship offer, a full ride, essentially, that was withdrawn under unusual circumstances. Lorna sighed. It was a long, tragic sound. She placed a hand on Richard's arm. I tried to tell you, Mrs. Carver, Lorna said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We didn't want to involve the school, but Mackenzie has been having a very hard time lately. In what way? Mrs. Carver asked sharply. Mentally, Lorna said, tapping her own temple lightly. Since her mother passed, she has struggled. She invents things, grandiose achievements, scholarships that don't exist. She tells us she has straight A's, but then we find out she is barely attending class. She gets very agitated when we confront her. That is not true, I whispered. See? Lorna looked at Mrs. Carver with sad, pitying eyes. She is in denial. We have been trying to get her help. The scholarship she talks about? It was a brochure, just a brochure. But she convinced herself it was an acceptance letter. When we tried to explain the reality to her, she threw herself against the wall. She hurts herself to make us feel guilty. I stared at Lorna. The lie was so audacious, so perfectly constructed, that it took my breath away. She was using my bruises, the bruises she gave me, as proof of my insanity. She hurts herself? Mrs. Carver repeated. She did not look at Lorna. She looked at me. Is that how you got the bruises on your arm? Mackenzie, you threw yourself against a wall? I looked at Richard. He was staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. He believed Lorna, or he wanted to believe her because it was easier than facing the truth. No, I didn't. She gets confused, Lorna interjected smoothly. I will go get that tea. Lorna stood up and walked toward the kitchen. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor. Click, click, click. The moment she was out of earshot, the air in the room changed. It became electric. Richard, Mrs. Carver said, turning to my father, your daughter is not lying. I saw her transcripts. I saw the offer in the system before it was deleted. Someone is blocking her future. Richard looked uncomfortable. Lorna handles the household matters. She says Mackenzie isn't ready. I leaned forward, desperation clawing at my chest. I lowered my voice to a frantic whisper. Mrs. Carver, please. She hid them. The report cards, the acceptance letter, the financial aid forms. They are all here. Where? Mrs. Carver whispered back. The study, I said, pointing toward the open door of my father's office adjacent to the dining room. In the filing cabinet. She has the key. But sometimes... I stopped. Through the open door of the study, I could see the bottom drawer of the heavy oak filing cabinet. It was slightly ajar. Lorna must have been in there earlier and failed to push it shut until it clicked. And there, sticking out from the top of a hanging folder, was the corner of a thick, creamy envelope. It had the university's crimson crest on it, and in bold black letters, visible even from 10 feet away, were the words, Scholarship Award Notification. Mrs. Carver followed my gaze. She saw it. I saw her eyes lock onto the paper. She shifted in her chair, her muscles tensing as if she were about to spring up and grab it. Is that it? She breathed. Yes, I whispered. Mrs. Carver started to stand up. Mr. West, if I could just show you. Here we are. Lorna's voice rang out like a gunshot. She swept back into the room carrying a silver tray with a teapot and cups. Mrs. Carver froze halfway out of her chair, then slowly sank back down. Lorna placed the tray on the table with a sharp clatter. Her eyes darted from me to Mrs. Carver, then to the open study door. She saw what we had seen. Lorna walked over to the study door. She did not hurry. She moved with a terrifying casualness. She reached out, placed her hand on the handle of the door, and pushed it shut until the latch clicked. Then she turned the lock. She turned back to us, smiling. Drafty in there, she said. She poured the tea. Sugar, Mrs. Carver? No, Mrs. Carver said. Her voice was icy. I think I have seen enough. Lorna sat down and took a sip of her tea. I think you should leave. Mrs. Carver, it is inappropriate for a teacher to intrude on a private family matter, especially when you're feeding into a troubled girl's delusions. It is not a delusion, Mrs. Carver said, her voice shaking slightly. I saw the envelope, Mrs. West, in the drawer. Lorna's smile vanished. The mask slipped, just for a second, revealing the predator beneath. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that Richard, who had gone back to staring at his hands, pretended not to hear. If you continue to harass my family, Lorna said, if you continue to trespass and make wild accusations, I will contact the dean. I will contact the school board. Westlake Development is a major donor to your district. Mrs. Carver, I will sue you for harassment, and I will sue the school for emotional distress caused to my stepdaughter. Do you understand? She needs stability, not your drama. It was a checkmate, and we all knew it. Mrs. Carver was a teacher near retirement. She could not fight a wealthy family. She could not fight the school board. Mrs. Carver stood up. She looked small and defeated. She picked up her bag. "I will leave," she said. My heart shattered. It felt like the physical breaking of a bone. She was leaving. I was staying. The darkness was closing back in. Mrs. Carver walked to the door, Lorna following her like a warden escorting a prisoner. At the threshold, Mrs. Carver stopped. She turned to me. I was still sitting at the table, tears streaming silently down my face. She ignored Lorna. She walked back to me, reached out, and took my cold hand in hers. Her skin was dry and warm. She squeezed my fingers hard, not like Lorna squeezed to hurt, but to anchor me. "Mackenzie," she said clearly, making sure Lorna heard every word. "If anything happens, if you are ever in danger, you call me. I don't care what time it is. You call me. I believe you. I believe you more than you think." Then she looked at Lorna one last time, a look of pure disgust, and walked out into the winter night. Lorna slammed the door and locked it. She turned to me, her face twisting into a sneer. "Well," she said, "that was embarrassing. Go to your room, Mackenzie, and don't expect to leave it for the rest of the week." I went upstairs, but as I lay in the dark, listening to the wind howl against the window, I held my hand where Mrs. Carver had touched it. It was a small thing, a tiny, fragile thread, but it was the first time in 3 years that someone had looked at the monster in my house and not looked away. She hadn't saved me, not that night, but she had seen me, and sometimes being seen is the only thing that keeps you alive until you can save yourself. The winter after Sylvia Carver came to our house was the longest of my life. I thought her visit might change things, might shame my father into action or scare Lorna into backing off. I was naive. It did the opposite. It taught Lorna that the walls of our house were not thick enough and that she needed to build a fortress of silence around me. The very next week, Lorna sat me down at the kitchen table. There was no screaming, no violence, just a terrifyingly calm administrative meeting about my future. She told me that Richard's business was suffering liquidity issues. She said the economy was crashing, which was true for the rest of the world, but not for Westlake urban development, and that the family could no longer support the indulgence of my education. I was pulled out of community college. I was told to get a full-time job to contribute to the household expenses. "It is time you paid your way," Lorna said, sipping her morning coffee. "You are an adult, Mackenzie. You have been leeching off your father's kindness for too long." I knew about the trust fund. My grandfather, Benjamin West, had set it up specifically for this moment. $400,000. It was sitting in an account somewhere, gathering interest, meant to pay for tuition, books, and housing. But when I opened my mouth to mention it, Richard, who was reading the newspaper, simply turned the page and said nothing. He had become a ghost in his own home, a man who had traded his spine for a quiet life. So, I went to work. I doubled my shifts at the coffee shop. I took a second job stocking shelves at a grocery store on the night shift. I worked 60 hours a week, and every Friday, Lorna would stand there with her hand out, demanding rent for the room I had grown up in. She took 70% of my paycheck. She called it room and board. I called it theft. For 2 years, I lived in a fog of exhaustion. I was too tired to fight, too tired to plan, too tired to dream. That was her strategy. If you keep a person exhausted, they cannot run away, they cannot hire a lawyer, they cannot uncover the truth. But the human spirit is a stubborn thing. At 21, the fog lifted just enough for me to feel the rage again. It happened on a Tuesday night. I had come home early from the grocery store because of a power outage. I walked into the house and heard laughter. In the dining room, Lorna and Richard were popping a bottle of champagne. Sitting between them was Dylan, Lorna's son from her first marriage. He was my age, but while I had calluses on my hands and bags under my eyes, Dylan looked fresh, rested, and expensive. "To Dylan," Lorna toasted, her face glowing with pride. "Accepted to the university business program, the start of a legacy." I stood in the doorway, still wearing my uniform vest that smelled of cardboard and dust. The injustice hit me like a physical blow. Dylan had barely graduated high school. His grades were mediocre at best, and that university, a private, prestigious institution, cost $50,000 a year just for tuition. "How?" I asked. My voice was raspy from lack of sleep. They turned to look at me. The celebration died instantly. "How are you paying for it?" I walked into the room, my hands shaking. "You told me we were broke. You told me there was no money for community college. How are you paying for Dylan?" "Go to your room, Mackenzie," Richard said, not looking at me. "No," I said. I looked at Lorna. "It is the trust fund, isn't it? Grandpa Ben's money. You are using my money to send him to school." Lorna set her glass down. She stood up slowly. "It is family money, Mackenzie, and we are investing it in the child who actually has a future. Dylan is going to take over the company one day. You are stocking shelves. We are just being practical." "It is my name on that trust," I screamed. "Grandpa left it to me." Lorna crossed the room in 3 strides. I flinched, but I did not back down. This time, I was ready for the hit. She grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked my head back. It was blindingly painful. She shoved me backward, and I tripped over the rug, landing hard on my tailbone. "You ungrateful little wretch," she hissed, standing over me. "You have nothing. You are nothing. Mention that money again, and you will be on the street tonight." I looked up at my father. Richard West sat at the table, clutching his champagne flute. He watched his wife assault his daughter, and he did not move a muscle. "Dad?" I whispered. He looked at me, his eyes watery and weak. "Don't make your mother mad. Mackenzie, just don't upset her." That was the moment my father died. He was still breathing, still drinking his wine, but the father I had loved was dead. I stood up. I did not say another word. I went upstairs, grabbed a black trash bag, and filled it with my clothes. I took my hidden stash of cash, $300 I had managed to squirrel away in a hollowed-out book, and I walked out the front door. Lorna yelled something after me, something about how I would come crawling back in a week when I got hungry. I did not look back. I walked 4 miles in the rain to the bus station and slept on a bench. The next 10 years were a blur of grit and survival. I rented a room in a basement apartment in East Cleveland that smelled of mold and cat litter. I slept on a mattress on the floor. I worked as a bartender at a dive bar where the floor was sticky with spilled beer, and the patrons grabbed my wrists when they wanted a refill. I worked data entry for a logistics company during the day, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. I did not go crawling back. I enrolled in night classes at the state university, taking 1 or 2 courses a semester because that was all I could afford. I paid for every credit hour with tips from the bar. It took me 7 years to get a 4-year degree. I was the oldest student in most of my classes, sitting in the back row with my work uniform in my bag, drinking cold coffee to stay awake. While I was scraping by, Westlake urban development was soaring. I would see their signs on construction sites all over the city. Westlake, building your future. I saw pictures on social media, before I blocked them all. Lorna and Richard in a new mansion on the shores of Lake Erie, a sprawling estate with a private dock. Dylan posting photos from spring break in Cabo, driving a new BMW, wearing suits that cost more than my entire semester's tuition. They had stolen my life. They had taken the safety net my grandfather built for me and used it to weave a golden parachute for themselves. I cut them off completely. When I changed my number, I felt a phantom limb sensation, like I had amputated a gangrenous part of myself. Occasionally, a text would come through on an old email address or a LinkedIn message from Lorna. "Hope you are happy living like a peasant. We are praying for you," or from Richard. "Call us if you need help, but don't ask for money." I never replied. I deleted them, buried them, and kept climbing. By the time I turned 30, I was no longer the girl with the trash bag of clothes. I had graduated with honors in data science. I had landed a junior analyst position, then a senior role. I was good at it. I understood patterns. I understood that if you look at the data long enough, The truth always reveals itself. Now, at 34, I was a senior data analyst at Lakeview Insight Group. I made six figures. I owned a condo in the flats with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Cuyahoga River. My apartment was everything my childhood home was not. It was stark, modern, and white. There were no heavy curtains to hide behind. There were no secrets. Every surface was clean. I had built a life that was impenetrable. I had security cameras. I had a savings account with 6 months of expenses. I had control. But trauma is not something you can evict just because you have a nice view. It lived in my sleep, 3 or 4 times a week. I would have the nightmare. In the dream, I was back in the hallway of the colonial house. I was 19 again. I could hear knocking at the front door. Bang, bang, bang. I knew it was Mrs. Carver. I knew she had come to save me. I would run to the door, but my feet were stuck in cement. I would scream, but no sound came out. Then the scene would shift. I would be in my father's study. The filing cabinet was there. I would pry it open, and inside, I would see them. Stacks of report cards. Thousands of dollars in checks made out to me. Letters from universities begging me to attend. I would reach for them, but before my fingers could touch the paper, the cabinet would slam shut on my hands. I would look up, and Lorna would be standing there, laughing silently, her face distorting into a mask of pure malice. I would wake up gasping for air, sweating in my expensive sheets, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I would get up, drink a glass of water, and stare at the river lights until the sun came up. I told myself I was fine. I told myself the past was dead. I had won. I was successful. They could not touch me here. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. It was a gray morning in November. I was at my desk at Lakeview, sipping an espresso, scrolling through the list of potential high-value clients that the sales team had uploaded for risk assessment. My job was to vet these companies, check their solvency, their legal history, their viability. My eyes scanned down the list. TechCore Solutions, Vanguard Logistics, Westlake Urban Development. I froze. The coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. There it was, item number 14 on the spreadsheet. The name seemed to pulse on the screen. Westlake Urban Development. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked on the entry. The contact name listed was Dylan West, CEO. Dylan was the CEO now. Richard must have retired or been pushed out. I stared at the financial summary attached to the file. Revenue was high, but there were flags, strange debt ratios, rapid expansion that the cash flow did not justify. My heart was racing, but my brain, my analyst brain, switched on. Why were they coming to Lakeview? They needed capital. They needed a valuation for a merger or a massive loan. I closed the file. I should have recused myself. I should have gone to my boss, David, and said, "Conflict of interest. This is my family." But I did not. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. They were swimming into my waters now. They thought they were the sharks, but they did not realize I had spent the last 10 years learning how to hunt. I went home that evening feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. The barrier I had built between my past and my present had developed a hairline fracture. I walked into my lobby, nodded to the doorman, and checked my mailbox. Usually, it was just junk mail and subscription magazines. But today, there was a single, thick brown envelope. It looked old. The paper was weathered, the corners slightly bent. There was no postage stamp, just a hand-delivered label. I pulled it out. My blood ran cold. The return address was stamped in faded blue ink. Riverside High School, Administrative Archives. I stood in the lobby, the noise of the city fading away. Why would my high school be writing to me 15 years later? I took the elevator up to my floor, the envelope burning a hole in my hand. I unlocked my door, dropped my keys on the counter, and turned on the bright kitchen lights. I used a letter opener to slit the top of the envelope. My hands were trembling, not from cold, but from a deep, primal instinct that whispered, "This is it. This is the thing that breaks the silence. I reached inside and pulled out the contents. There were photocopies, old, grainy photocopies. I recognized the font immediately. It was a transcript, my transcript, but not the one I had received in the mail years ago. This one had different numbers, better numbers. And clipped to it was a letter. It was handwritten on lined paper, the penmanship shaky and erratic, as if written by a hand that could barely hold the pen. Dear Mackenzie, it began. If you are reading this, it means I am finally brave enough, or perhaps desperate enough, to do what I should have done that night in your kitchen. I looked at the signature at the bottom. The ink was smeared slightly, as if a tear had fallen on the page before it dried. Sylvia Carver. I leaned against the kitchen island, the paper shaking in my hand. The past was not dead. It had just been waiting for the right moment to knock on my door, and this time, I was going to answer. I carried the envelope to my kitchen island. The marble was cold under my elbows as I leaned down, spreading the contents out under the harsh glare of the recessed lighting. My apartment was silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my own heart, which seemed to echo against my ribs like a trapped bird. The first thing I pulled out was a stack of paper clipped together with a rusted metal clip. It was a photocopy of my official high school transcript, dated from the year I turned 19. I ran my finger down the column of grades. A, A, A-, A. For 15 years, Lorna had told me I was stupid. She had told me I was lucky to even pass, that my memory of being a good student was a delusion brought on by trauma. But here it was, proof, black and white ink that screamed the truth. I had not failed. I had excelled. Beneath the transcript was a single sheet of lined notebook paper. The handwriting was shaky, the loops of the letters jagged, as if written by a hand that could no longer hold a pen steady. The date at the top was from 3 months ago. Dear Mackenzie, the letter began. I am writing this from my kitchen table, looking at a garden I will not be able to tend next spring. The doctors tell me my heart and lungs are failing. I am moving to Maple Grove Care Center next week. They say it is for the best, but we both know it is a waiting room for the end. I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. Sylvia Carver. I could see her face clearly, the way she used to peer over her glasses at me. Before I packed up my house, I did something I should have done a decade ago. I used my old faculty credentials, which, surprisingly, were never revoked, to access the district's physical archives in the basement of the administration building. I told the clerk I was looking for old curriculum guides. I lied. I was looking for your file. I turned the page. My hands were trembling so badly the paper rattled. I found it, Mackenzie, but I also found something that made me sick to my stomach. Do you remember the week after I came to your house? The week you disappeared from school? I wrote a formal incident report. I detailed the bruises I saw on your arm. I detailed the conversation with your stepmother. I detailed the suspected withholding of academic mail. I submitted it to the principal's office, marked for immediate review by Child Protective Services and the district superintendent. It was never filed. I found the original copy still paper-clipped to a do not process memo signed by the principal. The memo is attached. I frantically shuffled through the papers until I found it. A small, grainy photocopy of an internal memo. It was short and brutal. Regarding Carver complaint West family. Hold processing. Westlake Urban Development is currently finalizing the gold tier sponsorship for the new athletic complex. We cannot risk alienation at this critical juncture. Handle internally. Handle internally, I whispered. The words tasted like bile. They had traded my safety for a football field. They had sold a 19-year-old girl's future for bleachers and a scoreboard. I went back to the letter. 2 days after I submitted that report, I was transferred. Do you remember? I was moved to a high school 3 districts over. They told me it was a staffing emergency. It wasn't. It was an exile. They needed me gone so I couldn't ask questions about why no one had visited your house. I was a coward. Mackenzie, I should have gone to the police, but I was 55. My husband had just passed, and I needed my pension. Lorna threatened to sue me for harassment, and the principal made it clear my job was on the line, so I took the transfer. I let them silence me. But I kept looking, even from a distance. Included in this envelope is a document I found in the Public Records Annex last month. It is a copy of the trust fund your grandfather, Benjamin West, established. Look at the trustee designation. I pushed the letter aside and grabbed the legal document. It was a deed of trust, dated the year before my grandfather died. I scanned the legalese until I found the section on beneficiaries. Beneficiary: Mackenzie Alice West. Sum: $412,000. Condition: funds to be released upon beneficiary's 18th birthday for educational purposes, or at age 25 for general use. $400,000. I felt the room spin. That money could have paid for college. It could have paid for an apartment. It could have saved me from 7 years of scrubbing floors and serving drinks to men who didn't respect me. But then my eyes drifted to the bottom of the page, to the section labeled Trustee. The original typed name, Benjamin West, had been crossed out. Beside it, in handwriting I recognized instantly, a sharp, angular script, was written, Richard and Lorna West. And the date of the amendment? It was dated 2 weeks before my grandfather died, when he was in hospice and pumped full of morphine. I did the math. Mackenzie. Sylvia's letter continued. I tracked the withdrawal dates. The trust was drained of nearly its entire balance over a period of 4 years, starting exactly 1 month after your stepbrother, Dylan, was accepted into that private university in the East. I grabbed my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I pulled up Dylan's LinkedIn profile. Education, Villanova University, class of 2013. I looked at the withdrawal sheet Sylvia had included. August 2009. $52,000. January 2010. $52,000. It lined up perfectly, down to the cent. They hadn't just cut me off. They hadn't just refused to pay for my school because times were tough. They had stolen the money my grandfather left for me, the money that was legally mine, and used it to buy Dylan a degree. They had cannibalized my future to feed his. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal sound of rage that wanted to tear the walls down. I stood up and paced the kitchen, my hands gripping my hair. He got my life. I thought, he is walking around with my degree, my career, my safety net, while I was living in a basement eating ramen noodles. I forced myself to go back to the letter. There was more. There is one last thing, Sylvia wrote, and this is the thing that keeps me awake at night. Do you remember when Lorna invited me out to the porch that night? To explain your mental state? I didn't trust her. I had a small dictation machine in my purse. I used it for grading oral presentations. I turned it on before I stepped outside. I stopped breathing. I recorded her, Mackenzie. I recorded her telling me that she hid your transcripts. I recorded her saying that you were too weak to succeed and that she was doing it to save your father from embarrassment. She admitted it. She admitted all of it. But then, life happened. I moved. The tape got lost in a box of old teaching materials. I thought it was gone forever. But when I was packing for the nursing home, I found a box of old cassettes labeled Student Essays 2009. I haven't had the courage to listen to them yet. I don't know if the tape is still good, or if I even have the right player anymore, but I packed them. They are with me at Maple Grove. If you receive this letter, it means I am finally ready to stop being afraid of Westlake urban development. I am an old woman. Mackenzie, I have nothing left to lose. If you want to fight them, I will help you. I will tell the judge what I saw. I will tell them about the bruises. I am sorry it took me 15 years. Your teacher, Sylvia. I stared at the signature. A tape? A recording of Lorna admitting to fraud and abuse. It was the smoking gun. It was the thing that could turn a he said, she said domestic dispute into a federal indictment. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 2 a.m. I could not sleep. I could not sit still. I gathered every single piece of paper, the transcripts, the memos, the trust deed, the letter, and I laid them out on my dining table in a grid. It was a map. For the first time, I saw the shape of the monster that had eaten my youth. It wasn't just Lorna being mean. It wasn't just a wicked stepmother trope. It was a conspiracy. It required the cooperation of my father, who signed the checks. It required the silence of the school principal, who buried the report to keep the sponsorship money flowing. It required the complicity of the bank manager who allowed them to drain a trust fund that wasn't theirs. They had built an entire ecosystem of lies on top of my back. They had labeled me crazy and unstable, because it was the only way to discredit the one person who could bring the whole house of cards down. I walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was not the scared 19-year-old girl who hid her bruises under long sleeves. She was a senior data analyst. She was a woman who hunted discrepancies for a living. Lorna had made a mistake. She thought she had broken me. She thought that by taking my education, she had made me stupid. She didn't realize that pain is an education, too. And I had a PhD in survival. I gripped the edge of the sink, my knuckles turning white. "You came to my house for me," I whispered to the reflection, speaking to Sylvia. "You risked your job, your safety, everything, just to knock on that door." I wiped the water from my chin. "Now I am coming to find you," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "And then, Mrs. Carver, we are going to burn their whole world to the ground." I walked back to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and typed the address Sylvia had written at the bottom of the letter into my GPS. Maple Grove Care Center. It was an hour away. I grabbed my keys. I grabbed the envelope. I did not care that it was the middle of the night. I did not care that I had work in the morning. The timeline of my life had just reset. Everything before this moment was prologue. The real story, the story of my revenge, started now. The drive to Maple Grove Care Center took 45 minutes, but it felt like I was driving across a lifetime. The GPS led me away from the city lights, past the sprawling suburbs where my father lived, and out into the quiet, wooded edge of the county. The facility was a low, brick building surrounded by oak trees that had been stripped bare by the coming winter. It looked peaceful, but it was the kind of peace that comes when the fight is already over. I parked my car and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. The envelope with the transcripts was on the passenger seat. I felt a wave of nausea. I was about to walk into a room and look at the only person who had ever tried to save me, and I was terrified that I was too late. I was terrified that she would look at me and see the broken girl I used to be, not the woman I had built. I signed in at the front desk. The air inside smelled of antiseptic, boiled vegetables, and that faint, powdery scent of old age. "Sylvia Carver," I told the nurse, "room 104. The nurse looked at me over her glasses. "She is resting. Her breathing has been difficult today. Don't stay too long." I walked down the hallway, the linoleum squeaking under my boots. Room 104 was at the end of the hall. The door was open a crack. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. The room was small and dim, lit only by the blue glow of a television set tuned to a weather channel with the sound off. In the bed, propped up by pillows, lay a woman who looked like a shadow of the teacher I remembered. Sylvia Carver had been vibrant, a woman who commanded a classroom with a sharp wit and a stack of poetry books. Now, she was incredibly frail. Her skin was translucent, stretching tight over her cheekbones. A clear plastic tube ran under her nose, hissing softly with every breath she took. I stood by the door, unsure if I should speak. Then her eyes opened. They were the same. Amidst the ruin of her body, her eyes were still sharp, intelligent, and shockingly blue. She turned her head slowly, and when she saw me, those eyes widened. She did not look confused. She did not ask who I was. "Mackenzie," she whispered. Her voice was thin, like dry leaves scraping together. "Hello, Mrs. Carver," I said, my voice trembling. She raised a hand, her fingers trembling, and motioned for me to come closer. I walked to the side of the bed and took her hand. It was cold. "You came," she said. A tear leaked from the corner of her eye and tracked into her hairline. "I didn't think you would get the letter in time. I didn't think you would want to see me." I got it tonight, I said. I drove straight here. I am sorry, she said, her grip tightening surprisingly on my fingers. I am so sorry. Mackenzie, I failed you. I stood on your porch, and I let that woman scare me away. I let them push me out. You didn't fail me, I said, choking back a sob. You were the only one who knocked. Do you know how much that meant? For 15 years, I held on to that. You were the only proof I had that I wasn't crazy. Sylvia shook her head weakly. I should have done more. I let them buy my silence with a transfer order and a threat to my pension. I was a coward. You are not a coward, I said firmly. You are fighting them now. Sylvia took a rattle of a breath and pointed to a small metal box tucked underneath her bedside table. It looked like an old biscuit tin. Pull that out, she said. I crouched down and retrieved the box. It was heavy. I placed it on the bedspread. Sylvia nodded for me to open it. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was a silver USB drive and a stack of yellowed index cards wrapped in a rubber band. The cassette tape, Sylvia rasped. My nephew transferred it to digital for me last week. He cleaned up the audio. It was muffled because the recorder was in my purse. But you can hear her. You can hear Lorna. She pointed to the index cards. And those are my notes. From the days following my visit, I wrote down everything. The bruises I saw on your wrist, the way you flinched when she moved, and the phone call from the principal. I picked up the USB drive. It felt cold and industrial in my hand. What is on the recording? I asked. Play it, she said. There is a laptop in the drawer. Play it. I hesitated, then retrieved the laptop. I plugged in the drive. A single file appeared on the screen. Audio Evidence 2009, depicted.mp3. I pressed play. For a moment, there was just static. Then, the sound of a door opening, the sound of wind chimes. I remembered those chimes on our front porch. Then, a voice cut through the static. It was younger, smoother, but unmistakably Lorna. You are making a mistake, Mrs. Carver. Prying into private family matters is a dangerous hobby. Then Sylvia's voice, sounding stronger, younger. I am not prying. Mrs. West, I am concerned. Mackenzie had visible bruising, and she claims she hasn't seen her acceptance letters. I saw the envelope in the study. A pause. Then Lorna's laugh. A low, chilling sound. You saw what you wanted to see. Mackenzie is sick. She needs structure. She needs to know her place. By hiding her future? Sylvia asked on the tape. By protecting her from failure, Lorna snapped. I hold on to her records because she cannot handle them. She doesn't need to know everything. It is less embarrassing for Richard this way. If she thinks she failed, she stays home. She stays safe. If she thinks she succeeded, she leaves. And we cannot have her leaving just yet. The trust fund, well, let us just say family finances are complicated. My blood ran cold. She had admitted it. She had practically confessed to trapping me to access the money. But then came the sound that broke me. In the background of the recording, muffled by the wall but still audible, was a sound coming from inside the house. It was the sound of someone hyperventilating. It was a high, panicked gasping. That is me, I whispered, staring at the screen. I was just inside the door. I was listening. Yes, Sylvia said softly. I heard you too. The recording ended with the sound of the door slamming. I sat back, feeling a mixture of horror and vindication. It was real. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't my imagination. It was evidence. There is more, Sylvia said, tapping the stack of index cards. Look at the dates. I picked up the cards. They were written in Sylvia's neat, cursive script. December 14th, 2009. Called into Principal Miller's office. Told to drop the West inquiry. Miller mentioned that Westlake Urban Development is considering a major donation for the new stadium. January 10th, 2010. Transfer orders received. Effective immediately. Moving to Riverside North High School. Reason given. Staff restructuring. February 1st, 2010. Local paper headline, Westlake donates $200,000 for stadium renovation at Riverside High. I looked up at Sylvia. They paid him off, I said. They bought a football field to get rid of you. Principal Miller, Sylvia said, her voice dripping with disdain. Do you know where he is now? I shook my head. He retired 5 years ago, she said, and immediately took a position as a senior consultant for community relations at Westlake Urban Development. He makes 6 figures a year to shake hands and smile. It is a circle. Mackenzie, your father, your stepmother, the principal, the district administrators, they all scratched each other's backs, and they used your trust fund to pay for the manicure. It was a punch to the gut. I had thought this was just about a cruel stepmother, but it was corruption. It was a conspiracy involving public officials and private money. I want to testify, Sylvia said. She struggled to sit up straighter, fighting the weakness of her own body. I am dying. Mackenzie, my heart is functioning at 20%, but my mind is clear. I want to go on the record. I want to tell a judge what I saw before I go. You are too sick to go to court, I said gently. Then bring the court to me, she said fiercely. Video deposition, affidavit, whatever it takes. I am not going to let that woman win, not this time. I squeezed her hand. Okay, we will do it. We are going to burn them down. I stayed with her for another hour, going over every detail, recording a preliminary statement on my phone just in case. When I left Maple Grove, it was 3 a.m, but I was wide awake. I felt dangerous. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I did not care. I gathered the USB drive, the transcripts, the trust deed, and Sylvia's notes, and I drove downtown to a nondescript office building on 4th Street. It was the Office of Justice for Students, a nonprofit legal aid organization that specialized in educational fraud. I had found them at 4 a.m. during a frantic Google search. I didn't have an appointment, but the receptionist took one look at my face and the heavy box of documents I was carrying and called a paralegal. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room with a woman who looked like she ran on caffeine and righteous indignation. Her name was Ava Reynolds. She wasn't just a nonprofit lawyer. She was a former federal prosecutor who now worked on high-level educational fraud cases. She was sharp, terrifyingly focused, and she listened to my story without interrupting once. She read the transcripts, she looked at the trust deed, she listened to the audio recording of Lorna. When the tape finished, she leaned back in her chair and took off her glasses. This is not just a domestic dispute, Ava said. Her voice was low and calculated. You realize that, right? It feels like one, I said. No, Ava said, standing up and pacing the small room. If they used the trust fund, which was likely invested in federally insured accounts, and if they falsified school records, which are federal documents, and if there were student loans taken out in your name that you don't know about, we are looking at wire fraud. We are looking at embezzlement. And because the school district accepted a bribe to cover up abuse, that is a RICO predicate. She stopped and looked at me. Who is the company again? Westlake Urban Development, I said. Ava's eyes narrowed. I know them. My office has been looking at a pattern of irregularities in student loan applications coming out of the districts where they operate. We thought it was just a coincidence. Sloppy paperwork. She looked at the file again. This isn't sloppy. This is systemic. Your father and stepmother didn't just steal from you. They used the school system as their personal piggy bank and hush money fund. Ava sat down across from me. She folded her hands on the table. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the energy of a storm about to break. I can take this case, Ava said, but I need you to understand what that means. If we file this, it won't be a quiet civil suit for damages. I am going to take this to the U.S. Attorney. We are going to go after them for everything. Fraud, theft, conspiracy. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing. But the defense is going to come for you. Mackenzie, they are going to drag your name through the mud. They are going to say you are crazy. They are going to say you are a vindictive daughter who failed at life and wants a payout. They will put your medical history on trial. They will make you relive every slap, every insult, every moment of humiliation. She paused, letting the weight of the warning settle on my shoulders. So I have to ask you one question before I sign on to this. Ava said, "Are you ready? Are you ready to let the entire country know that your stepmother beat you when you were 19, that she hid your report cards, and that she stole your education to feed her own son? Are you ready to be the girl who was victimized, publicly, so that you can be the woman who wins?" I looked at the stack of papers. I thought about the cold wind on the porch that night. I thought about Sylvia Carver lying in that hospital bed, breathing through a tube, holding onto a biscuit tin of evidence for 15 years because she couldn't forgive herself. I thought about the nightmare I had every week, the one where the filing cabinet slammed shut on my hands. "If I don't do this," I said, my voice steady, "if I stay silent, then I am still in that house. I am still standing in that kitchen letting her hit me. If I don't speak, then every day for the rest of my life, I am still getting beaten in my head." I looked Ava Reynolds in the eye. "I am ready. Let us burn it down." Ava smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. She opened a fresh file folder and dropped my transcripts inside. "Okay," she said. "Let us go to work." The moment the subpoenas hit my father's desk, the West family did not panic. They attacked. It was a strategy Lorna had perfected over decades. If someone accuses you of a crime, you do not defend yourself. You destroy the accuser's credibility until their truth looks like a lie. I was sitting at my desk at Lakeview Insight Group, analyzing a risk portfolio, when my phone began to ring. It was not a client. It was the front desk. "Ms. Perry," the receptionist said, her voice tight. "There is a woman on the line claiming to be your aunt. She is screaming about you stealing money from elderly relatives. She says she wants to speak to your supervisor." I felt the blood drain from my face. I did not have an aunt. 2 hours later, I was called into the Human Resources office. My boss, David, looked uncomfortable. The HR director, a woman named Karen who usually greeted me with a smile, would not meet my eyes. "We have received several disturbing calls today," Mackenzie, Karen said, sliding a folder across the desk, "and an anonymous email alleging that you falsified your employment history and that you have a documented history of severe psychiatric instability, including institutionalization." "It is a lie," I said, my voice shaking. "My family is being investigated for federal fraud. This is retaliation." "We value you, Mackenzie," David said gently, "but the allegations involve financial impropriety. Given the sensitive nature of our data, we have to follow protocol. We are placing you on paid administrative leave pending an internal review. It is just to keep the heat off the firm until this blows over." They were being polite, but I knew what it meant. I was a liability. Lorna had not just hidden my report cards this time. She was trying to erase my livelihood. I walked out of the building with my box of personal items, feeling the eyes of my colleagues burning into my back. They were wondering if the quiet, incompetent analyst was actually a crazy woman who stole from old people. I went home and sat in the dark, anger vibrating under my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive to their house and break windows. But then my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I did not recognize. "Hey, Kenzie, it is Dylan. Mom is losing it. Can we talk? I just want peace." Dylan, my stepbrother, the golden boy who was walking around with a degree bought with my money. I had not spoken to him in 10 years. I forwarded the text to Ava Reynolds immediately. "Fish is biting," Ava replied 1 minute later. "Meet him. Public place. Do not agree to anything. Just listen." I met Dylan at a trendy gastropub in the Flats. He walked in wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. Looking every inch the young CEO. He hugged me before I could recoil, smelling of expensive cologne and entitlement. "I am so sorry about all this," he said, ordering a craft beer without looking at the menu. "Mom is on a warpath. You know how she gets." I stared at him. He was trying to play the good cop, the innocent bystander. "She called my job." "Dylan," I said coldly. "She told them I was in a mental institution." "Yeah, that is rough," he said, taking a sip. "Look, Dad is freaking out. He is practically living at the Silver Birch Lodge right now. He keeps checking the wall safe like he expects the FBI to burst in. He is paranoid. My ears perked up. The Silver Birch Lodge. It was the family's vacation cabin, a secluded luxury retreat 2 hours east on the lake. Why is he checking the safe? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Dylan laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You know, Dad, he keeps everything there. The original trust deeds, the agreements with the school district, the hard drives. He thinks if he keeps it out of the main house, it is safe from subpoenas. He doesn't realize digital footprints exist. He leaned in, his voice dropping. Look, Kenzie, just take a settlement. Dad wants to offer you money, a lot of money, just to drop the lawsuit. If you keep pushing, Lorna is going to burn your whole life down. I am telling you this as a brother. You are not my brother, I said, and tell Richard I am not interested in hush money. I left the bar 5 minutes later. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. I dialed Ava as soon as I was in my car. He told me where the evidence is. I said, it is at the Silver Birch Lodge, in a wall safe. 2 days later, the invitation came. It was a formal email from Richard's personal account. Family meeting, Silver Birch Lodge, Saturday, 7 in the evening. Let us resolve this without lawyers. It was a trap. I knew it. They wanted to get me alone, isolated in the woods, and bully me into submission just like they did when I was 19. I am going, I told Ava in her office. You are not going alone, Ava said. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small, flat device. This is a high-fidelity recorder. It has a 10-hour battery life. Tape it to your chest. Your phone will also be transmitting real-time audio to my team. We will have federal agents parked half a mile down the access road. If the signal cuts, or if you say the safe word, we breach the door. What is the safe word? I asked. Tuition, Ava said, unsmiling. I taped the wire to my sternum, hiding it under a thick wool sweater. I drove to the lodge as the sun was setting. The property was beautiful and terrifying. Huge pine trees, a long gravel driveway, and the cabin itself, which was really a mansion made of timber and stone overlooking the black water of the lake. Richard opened the door. He looked aged. His eyes were red-rimmed. Hello, Mackenzie, he said. I walked into the great room. A fire was roaring in the stone fireplace. Lorna was sitting on a leather sofa, holding a glass of wine. She did not stand up. So, the prodigal daughter returns, Lorna said. I sat in the armchair opposite them. I felt the recorder warm against my skin. I am here, I said. What do you want? We want to help you, Richard said. He picked up a folder from the coffee table. This has gone too far. Mackenzie, the press, the lawyers. It is destroying the family. I am willing to write you a check today. $200,000, tax-free. I looked at the check. It was half of what was in the trust fund originally, not counting 15 years of interest. And what do I have to do? I asked. Sign this, Richard said, sliding a document across the table. It is a non-disclosure agreement. You drop the suit. You retract your statements to the press. You admit that the allegations were the result of emotional confusion. Admit I am crazy, I said. That is what you mean. It is a standard clause, Lorna said, swirling her wine. Don't be dramatic. 200,000 is more money than you have ever seen. You should take it and thank your father. I looked at her. I needed her to say it. I needed the confession. Why would I thank him? I asked, letting my voice rise, feigning the emotional instability they always accused me of having. You beat me, Lorna. You hit me in the kitchen. You slammed me against the wall. Do you think money fixes that? Lorna laughed. It was that same dry, dismissive laugh from my childhood. Oh, please, she said. You are still harping on that? 1 slap? Maybe 2? You were a hysterical teenager throwing a tantrum. I was disciplining you. I was 19. I said I was an adult. You were a child acting out, Lorna snapped. And look at you now, still playing the victim. You know, Mackenzie, nobody believes a 19-year-old girl who gets hit, and just stays in the house. If it was real abuse, you would have left, but you stayed. That proves you knew you deserved it. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. She had just admitted the assault. And the transcripts? I asked. Why did you hide them? Why did you tell me I failed? Because I was protecting this family, Lorna hissed. She stood up and walked toward the fire. You were not ready for university. You would have gone there, failed out in a semester, and embarrassed us. I did you a favor. I hid those report cards so you wouldn't have to face your own mediocrity. You should be thanking me. If I hadn't stopped you, you would have wasted thousands of dollars just to fail. I looked at Richard. He was staring at the floor. And the money? Dad? I asked softly. Grandpa Ben left that money for me. It was in my name. Richard sighed. He looked up, and his face was hard. I made an executive decision. Mackenzie. You stole it, I said. I reallocated it, Richard corrected, his voice rising. Look at Dylan. He is a CEO. He runs the company. He is expanding the business. That money was an investment. Putting $400,000 into your education would have been like throwing it into a fire. You were working at a coffee shop. Dylan had a future. You didn't. My heart hammered against the wire on my chest. There it was. The justification. The admission of wire fraud and embezzlement, wrapped in the arrogance of a father who never loved me. So you admit you signed my name? I asked. You admit you moved the funds to pay for Dylan's tuition? I did what I had to do to save the company and secure the legacy, Richard shouted, slamming his hand on the table, and I would do it again. Now sign the paper, take the check, and get out of my life. I stood up. My legs felt steady. The fear was gone. No, I said. Lorna turned around, her eyes narrowing. Excuse me? I am not signing, I said, and I am not taking your money. Lorna sneered. You think you can win in court? You have nothing, no proof, just the word of a senile old teacher and your own delusions. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the knob. You might be right, I said, or maybe the world is finally ready to listen. I walked out into the cold night air. The moment the heavy timber door clicked shut behind me, my knees almost gave out. I walked quickly to my car, my breath forming white clouds in the darkness. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ava. Got it. Crystal clear. We have the admission of assault, the suppression of mail, and the misappropriation of the trust fund. Get out of there. I drove down the long gravel driveway, passing the dark shapes of the federal agents' cars parked in the shadows of the pine trees. I looked in my rearview mirror at the silver birch lodge glowing warm and golden in the distance. Lorna and Richard were probably pouring another drink, congratulating themselves on handling me. They thought I was walking away defeated. They did not know I had just walked out with the nail for their coffin taped to my chest. I turned onto the main road and let out a scream of pure, raw release. The silence was over. The war was won. Now, all that was left was to watch them burn. The recording from the Silver Birch Lodge was not just a smoking gun. It was a nuclear warhead. I sat in Ava Reynolds' office less than 12 hours after leaving the cabin. The sun was barely up, casting long, gray shadows across the piles of legal briefs on her desk. Ava was listening to the audio file for the 10th time. She had her headphones on, her eyes closed, tapping a pen against her chin. She paused the track right after Richard's voice shouted, I did what I had to do to save the company. Ava took off the headphones and looked at me. Her expression was terrifyingly calm. That is intent, she said. That is admission of knowledge. And Lorna admitting she hid the transcripts to protect the family reputation? That is obstruction of a federal education benefit. She picked up her phone. I am calling the judge. We are getting a warrant for that safe. By noon. A convoy of unmarked federal vehicles was turning onto the gravel driveway of the Silver Birch Lodge. I was not there. Ava insisted I stay away to avoid any confrontation, but she texted me updates. Entry secured. Safe located behind the painting in the study. Drilling now. I sat in my apartment, staring at the river, imagining the scene. I imagined Richard's face as the agent swarmed his sanctuary, He had thought the cabin was his fortress, a place where the laws of the outside world did not apply. He was learning, very painful, that the FBI did not care about his zip code. At 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Jackpot! The contents of the safe were brought back to the federal building in sealed evidence bags. Ava called me in at 5. When I walked into the conference room, the table was covered in plastic-wrapped documents. You were right, Ava said. She was wearing latex gloves, handling a yellow document with extreme care. He kept everything. Arrogance is a hell of a drug. He thought he was untouchable. She slid a document toward me. It was the original deed of trust from my grandfather. I looked down at it through the plastic. I saw my grandfather's signature at the bottom, shaky but distinct, and then I saw the section for the trustee. It was a mess of correction fluid and black ink. The name Benjamin West had been white-outed, and over the dried, crusty white patch, someone had typed Richard West, but the typewriter ribbon had been old. The ink was faint. You could still see the ghost of my grandfather's name underneath. Forensics will confirm it, Ava said, but visually, it is a clumsy forgery, and look at the date next to the amendment. It is dated 3 days after your grandfather slipped into a coma. He stole it, I whispered. He didn't even wait for him to die. Keep looking, Ava said. She pointed to a stack of emails printed on plain white paper. This is the connection to the school. I picked up the stack. These were emails between Richard's personal account and a generic administrative address. I recognized the name in the header, Principal Miller. The subject line was Sponsorship and Student Issues. Richard. The email read, The situation with the Carver teacher is becoming problematic. She is threatening to go to the board about the domestic allegations. We cannot have that kind of noise while the district is reviewing the Westlake bid for the stadium renovation. The board is sensitive to scandal. And Richard's reply, sent 20 minutes later. Handle it. Miller, the girl is unstable. Carver is overstepping. If you can resolve this internally and ensure the file is closed, Westlake is prepared to expedite the check for the new scoreboard and bleachers, let us say, $200,000? Consider it an investment in the community. I felt sick. I actually grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. He bought him, I said, my voice thick with disgust. He bought the principal, $200,000. That is exactly half of my trust fund. He took your money, Ava said, her voice hard. And he used it to bribe the school to shut up the teacher who was trying to save you. He paid for your silence with your own inheritance. The rest of the documents were just as damning. There were withdrawal slips from the trust account that matched the tuition due dates for Dillon's University perfectly. There were letters from the financial aid office regarding my file, marked Return to Sender in Lorna's handwriting. This is a conspiracy, Ava said, pacing the room. This is RICO territory. We have wire fraud because the money moved across state lines to the university. We have mail fraud because they tampered with the postal service to hide your letters. We have bribery of a public official, and we have the underlying crime of domestic abuse of a dependent. She stopped and looked at me. We have enough to bury them, Mackenzie, but we need to lock down the witnesses. The paper is good, but juries need people. The next week was a blur of interviews. Ava's team tracked down the administrative clerk who had worked in the high school office 15 years ago. Her name was Mrs. Gable, and she was retired in Florida now. When the investigators knocked on her door, she did not hesitate. She had hated Principal Miller. She gave a sworn statement over video call. Her face was pixelated on the screen, but her voice was clear. "Oh, I remember Mrs. West," Mrs. Gable said. "She came in once a week during Mackenzie's senior year. She told us Mackenzie was having a breakdown and couldn't handle the pressure of college applications. She asked us to divert all mail to her directly. I thought it was strange. But Principal Miller came out of his office and told me to do whatever the West family wanted. He said they were VIP donors, so I handed Lorna the report cards. I handed her the scholarship packet. She signed for them right there at the counter." "Did you see Mackenzie?" Ava asked. "Once," Mrs. Gable said. She came in looking for her file. She had a bruise on her face. She tried to cover it with makeup, but the fluorescent lights in the office show everything. I wanted to say something, but I needed my job. I just told her the file was empty. I have felt guilty about that for 15 years. Then came Sylvia. We recorded her deposition in her room at the Maple Grove Care Center. Ava brought in a videographer. We set up a backdrop to make it look official. Sylvia sat up in bed, wearing her best Sunday blouse, the oxygen tube still running across her face. She was weak, but when the camera light turned red, she found a reserve of strength that silenced the room. She described the night she came to my house. She described the way Lorna smiled while digging her fingers into my shoulder. She described the fear in my eyes. "Why didn't you pursue the complaint?" Ava asked her gently. "I tried," Sylvia said, looking straight into the lens. "I wrote the report. I took it to Principal Miller. He threw it in the trash can in front of me. He told me that Westlake Urban Development was about to build us a new stadium and that he wasn't going to let a meddling English teacher ruin the budget. He told me I could take a transfer to Riverside North, or I could lose my pension. I was a widow. I was scared. So I took the transfer." She paused, her breath catching in her throat. "I sold that girl out," Sylvia said, tears welling in her eyes. "I let them buy my silence, and the price was a new football field." It was powerful. It was heartbreaking. It was the emotional anchor the case needed. But while we were building the case, the West family was not sitting idle. They launched a counteroffensive that was brutal and personal. They hired a crisis management PR firm. Suddenly, anonymous articles started appearing on local blogs and gossip sites. Local analyst, accused of elder abuse, suspended from firm. The truth about the West family scandal. A daughter's greed. They spun a narrative that was terrifyingly plausible to anyone who didn't know the truth. They claimed I was a troubled woman who had failed out of college due to drug use, a complete lie, and that my parents had cut me off to practice tough love. They claimed I had invented the abuse allegations 15 years later because I was jealous of my brother's success. My phone rang constantly with reporters asking for comments on my psychiatric history. People I hadn't spoken to in years sent me messages asking if I was okay, but with that tone that meant, "Are you crazy?" It was isolating. It was exactly what Lorna had threatened to do. She was trying to strip away my credibility so that by the time we got to court, the jury would see a monster, not a victim. "Don't read it," Ava told me one afternoon. We were in her office, preparing for the cross-examination. "It is noise. It is designed to break you. Don't let it—" "It is hard," I said. "They are rewriting my life." "Then we rewrite it back in court," Ava said. "But you have to be ready. Gregory Hales is their attorney. He is a shark. He is going to ask you the questions that hurt." "I am ready," I said. "Are you?" Ava looked at me. "Okay, let us practice. Why didn't you call the police?" "I was scared," I said. "Not good enough," Ava snapped. "You were 19. You had a phone. You had access to the outside world. Why didn't you call 911? "Because Lorna told me nobody would believe me." "Hales will say that is an excuse," Ava pressed. "He will say you didn't call because there was nothing to report. He will say you made it up. Why did you stay in the house? Mackenzie? Why didn't you just leave?" "I didn't have any money," I shouted. "They took my money." "And you could have gone to a shelter," Ava countered. "You could have gone to a friend. Why did you stay and let her hit you?" "Because she groomed me," I yelled, standing up. "Because she spent 3 years telling me I was worthless. Because when you are told every day that you are garbage, you don't think you deserve to be saved. And because my father stood there and watched it happen, and I kept hoping he would finally be a dad and stop her." The room went silent. I was breathing hard, tears stinging my eyes. Ava looked at me, her expression softening. "That is it," she said quietly. "That is the answer. That is what the jury needs to hear. The paralysis, the hope, the betrayal." She closed the file. "We have enough," Ava said. "I am not filing this in civil court. I am taking this to the U.S. Attorney's office tomorrow morning. We are filing federal charges, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, witness tampering, and we are tacking on the state charges for assault and battery." "Will they be arrested?" I asked. "Oh, yes," Ava said, a grim smile touching her lips. "We are going to time it for Monday morning. Maximum exposure. We are going to make sure the cameras are there." She looked at the whiteboard where she had mapped out the conspiracy. Westlake Urban Development, the school district, the trust fund, the house. "This is going to be the trial of the year. Mackenzie," she said, "but once we pull this trigger, there is no going back. They will come at you with everything they have. Are you sure?" I thought about the letter from Sylvia. I thought about the bruises I used to cover with long sleeves. I thought about the years I spent thinking I was stupid. "I don't want to go back," I said. "I want to go forward. File it." 2 days later, the news broke. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced the indictment of Richard West, Lorna West, and Dylan West on 34 counts of federal fraud and conspiracy. The headline ran on every channel. "Prominent developer family indicted in education fraud scandal." I watched it from my apartment. I saw the footage of Richard and Lorna being led out of the Silver Birch Lodge in handcuffs. Lorna looked furious, hiding her face from the cameras. Richard looked broken. But the relief was short-lived. The trial date was set. The venue was the district court in Cleveland. And that brought us to the morning of the trial. The morning I walked up the courthouse steps, past the screaming reporters, past the cameras, and into the room where my family was waiting to destroy me one last time. Ava was right. They had tried to bury me under paperwork and lies. But they forgot that seeds also grow underground, and I had broken through the dirt. The trial began on a Tuesday that was so bright it felt mocking. Inside the courtroom, the air was recycled and cold, smelling of floor polish and old wood. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Ava Reynolds, my hands folded so tightly in my lap that my fingernails left crescent-shaped indentations in my palms. Across the aisle, the West family sat like a portrait of aggrieved nobility. Richard wore a charcoal suit that made him look dignified, if weary. Lorna was in navy blue, a color chosen carefully to suggest humility and sorrow. Dylan sat between them, looking fresh-faced and confused, as if he had wandered into a felony trial by mistake on his way to a country club. Their lawyer, Gregory Hales, was a man who moved around the courtroom like a dancer. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with silver hair and a voice that could make a lie sound like a hymn. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Hales began his opening statement, resting a hand on the railing of the jury box. "We are here today because of a tragedy, but not the tragedy the prosecution has described. The tragedy here is a broken family, torn apart by the resentment of a young woman who could not accept her own limitations." He turned and pointed a finger at me. It felt like a gun barrel. "Mackenzie Perry is not a victim of fraud," Hales said softly. "She is a victim of her own expectations. She remembers a slap as a beating. She remembers a lost scholarship as a theft. She has constructed a fantasy world where her failures are crimes committed by the parents who tried, desperately, to save her from herself. This is not a case about money. It is a case about memory, and how unreliable it can be when fueled by jealousy." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I wanted to stand up and scream. Ava placed a hand on my arm, anchoring me. "Steady," she whispered. "Let him spin the web." The defense began their parade of witnesses. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. First came Lorna's friends from the charity circuit, women with tight faces and expensive jewelry who swore under oath that Lorna was a saint, who constantly worried about her troubled stepdaughter. "Mackenzie was always difficult," one woman said, sniffing into a tissue. "I remember visiting for tea, and she would be screaming upstairs, slamming doors. Lorna would come down in tears, saying she didn't know how to help her." Then came a doctor I barely recognized. Dr. Eris, a man my father had paid to see me once when I was 18 for a flu checkup. "Did you observe signs of anxiety in Ms. Perry?" Hales asked him. "She seemed agitated," the doctor said, adjusting his glasses. "High-strung. I recall suggesting to her parents that she might struggle with high-pressure environments, like university. So, in your medical opinion, her parents keeping her home was a protective measure? It was a reasonable precaution, the doctor agreed. It was a lie. My medical file had no diagnosis of anxiety, but the jury didn't know that yet. They just saw a doctor in a suit saying I was unstable. Then, the family took the stand. Dylan went first. He walked up to the witness box with a bounce in his step. Smiling nervously at the jury, he played the part of the confused, dutiful son perfectly. "Dylan," Hales asked, "did you know that the trust fund used for your education was originally in your sister's name?" Dylan shook his head, looking wide-eyed. "No, sir. My grandfather, Benjamin, always told us he wanted the money to build the family legacy. When Dad told me the trust was ready for my tuition, I just assumed it was, for the family. I never thought it belonged to Kenzie. Why would I take her money?" "And you graduated with honors?" "Yes, sir. Top of my class." "So the money was well spent?" "I like to think so. I run the company now. We employ 200 people. Ava declined to cross-examine him yet. She just let him sit there, looking perfect. It was a gamble. The jury looked at him and saw success. They looked at me and saw a woman suing her own brother. Then came Lorna. Lorna West should have won an Academy Award. She took the stand with a trembling lip. Clutching a lace handkerchief, when Hales asked her about our relationship, she burst into tears. "I tried," she sobbed. "God knows I tried to love her. But she was so angry after her mother died. She hated me for taking her mother's place. When she says I hit her, it breaks my heart. I never raised a hand to that child. Maybe I held her arm once or twice to stop her from throwing things. But beat her? Never." "And the report cards?" Hales asked gently. "Did you hide them?" I held them back," Lorna admitted, looking down at her hands. "But only because she was failing. She thought she had these great grades, but she didn't. I didn't want her to be crushed. I didn't want Richard to see her fail. I was protecting her dignity." It was such a twisted version of the truth that I felt dizzy. She had taken her cruelty and painted it as mercy. Finally, Richard took the stand. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. "Mr. West," Hales said, "why did you transfer the trust fund?" "We were on the brink of bankruptcy," Richard said, his voice hoarse. "The market in 2008. It destroyed us. I had to make a choice. Save the company, or let everything fall apart. I used the funds to bridge the gap. And then, yes, I invested in Dylan's education because he showed promise. Mackenzie. She wasn't ready. She was working at a coffee shop. She had no direction. I thought I could pay her back later." "So you didn't steal it?" "I borrowed it," Richard said, looking at the jury with pleading eyes. "To save the family, to save the roof over Mackenzie's head." By the time the defense rested, the mood in the courtroom had shifted. I could feel it. The reporters were typing furiously. The narrative was taking hold. A desperate family, a difficult daughter, a tragic misunderstanding. They had made themselves human, and they had made me into a monster of ingratitude. "Ava," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. "They believe them." "Not yet," Ava said. She stood up. "The prosecution calls Mackenzie Perry to the stand." Walking to the witness box felt like walking to the gallows. I swore to tell the truth, sat down, and looked out at the sea of faces. Lorna was staring at me, her eyes dry now, cold and hard as flint. Ava walked me through the basics, my job, my education, and then she took me back to that night. "Tell us about the night of December 12th, 2009. Ava said. I took a deep breath. "I came home with my transfer acceptance. I was happy. I showed it to Lorna. She tore it open. She told me I was stupid. She told me I had failed." "And then?" "I tried to take the letter back. She pushed me against the wall. She slapped me. Twice. She dug her fingers into my arm. I still remember the smell of her perfume. It was lavender. She told me I was nothing. She told me that if I called the police, no one would believe me because I was just a hysterical girl." Did your father help you? He wasn't there that night, but when he came home, he saw the bruises. He did nothing. He told me not to upset her. And the trust fund? I didn't know it was gone until I was 21. When I asked about it, Lorna laughed at me. Richard told me to stop causing trouble. Thank you, Ava said. Your witness. Gregory Hales stood up. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward me. He didn't look like a dancer anymore. He looked like a butcher. Ms. Perry, Hales said, his voice dripping with skepticism. You claim you were 19 years old when this alleged beating occurred. Is that correct? Yes. 19. An adult. You could vote. You could smoke. You could join the army. Yet you say your stepmother slapped you, and you just went to your room? She locked the door. I was scared. Scared? Hales laughed. You were an adult living in the suburbs, not a prisoner of war. You had a cell phone, didn't you? Yes. Did you call 911? No. Did you call a friend? No. Did you run out the front door? No. Hales leaned on the railing, getting closer to my face. So, let me get this straight. You were supposedly assaulted, your future was supposedly stolen, and yet you stayed in that house for another 2 years? You ate their food? You slept in their bed? You accepted their money? They took my money, I snapped. I was paying them rent. So you say. Hales dismissed. But the behavior you are describing, staying with your abuser, saying nothing, doing nothing, that doesn't sound like an innocent victim. Ms. Perry, that sounds like someone who knew they were in the wrong. That sounds like a daughter who knew she had started the fight and was ashamed. I wasn't ashamed, I said, my voice shaking. I was groomed. Groomed, Hales repeated the word with distaste. That is a buzzword. Ms. Perry, this is a court of law. We deal in facts. And the fact is, you never reported this crime for 15 years. Why? Why wait until your father's company is worth millions to suddenly remember how traumatized you were? He was twisting everything. He was making my survival look like complicity. I looked at the jury. They were frowning. They were wondering the same thing. Why didn't she just leave? Ms. Perry, Hales said, delivering his final blow. If you were really beaten, if you were really terrified, why didn't you call the police? The room went silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop huming. I looked at Lorna. She was smiling, a tiny, triumphant smile. She thought she had won. She thought the question had no answer. I looked back at Hales. Because, I said, my voice trembling but gaining strength with every word, because for 3 years, that woman told me I was crazy. She told me I was broken. She told me that the world would look at me and see a failure. And I believed her. I took a breath, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. You ask why I didn't call the police? Because my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, stood there and watched my life be dismantled and did nothing. I was taught that his reputation was more important than my safety. I was taught that if I opened my mouth, I would lose my family. I looked directly at Richard. He flinched. And you know what? I said softly. They were right. I opened my mouth, and I lost them. But today, sitting here, I accept that. I would rather be an orphan than be their daughter. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Hales paused. He had not expected that. He had expected me to crumble, not to bite back. No further questions, Hales said abruptly. Turning his back on me, I walked back to my seat. My legs felt like jelly. Ava leaned over. You did good. Did I? I whispered. Half the room still thinks I am a gold digger. It was true. The gallery was buzzing. The reporters were tweeting. The narrative was split. Brave survivor versus vindictive daughter. It was a stalemate. And in a case like this, a stalemate was a win for the defense. They didn't need to prove they were innocent. They just needed to prove I was unreliable. Judge Thorne banged his gavel. We will take a 15-minute recess. Court will reconvene at 3 o'clock. We went to the side room. I collapsed into a chair. It is not enough, I said, putting my head in my hands. Hales is good. He made me look weak. He made it look like a family squabble. He did, Ava admitted, pouring me a cup of water. He is playing to the jury's bias. People don't want to believe that wealthy, successful parents are monsters. They want to believe the kid is the problem. It is comfortable. She checked her watch. A grim smile spread across her face. But comfort, Ava said, is about to end. What do you mean? I asked. While Hales was busy painting you as a liar, Ava said, my team was busy verifying the metadata on the files we pulled from the safe, and we just got the certification back from the forensic accountant regarding the school district's ledger. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a new stack of documents. These were not photocopies. These were certified federal exhibits, stamped with the seal of the Department of Justice. We let them tell their story, Ava said, her eyes flashing. We let Richard claim he borrowed the money. We let Lorna claim she protected you. We let them lock themselves into a version of events under oath. She stood up and smoothed her skirt. Now, we are going to show the jury the receipts, not just the trust fund, Mackenzie, the whole chain, the house, the safe, the bribe. We are going to connect the hand that slapped you to the hand that signed the check to the principal. The bailiff knocked on the door. All rise. We walked back into the courtroom. The energy had shifted. The defense table looked relaxed. Richard was whispering to Dylan, probably planning their victory dinner. Ava walked to the center of the room. She did not look at Hales. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, Ava said, her voice ringing out clear and sharp. The prosecution calls its final witness, and we would like to introduce Exhibit G into evidence, a chain of documents and a digital recording recovered from the defendant's safe pursuant to a federal warrant. Hales stood up, looking confused. Objection. We haven't seen this chain. Oh, you have seen it. Mr. Hales, Ava said, turning to face him. Your clients wrote it. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A hush fell over the room as the bailiff wheeled in a television screen and a witness chair, and behind them, pushed in a wheelchair by a federal marshal, came Sylvia Carver. She was wearing her Sunday best, her oxygen tank humming softly, clutching the metal biscuit tin in her lap like a shield. Ava turned to me and winked. Now, she whispered, watch them burn. Ava Reynolds stood in the center of the courtroom, and she did not look like a lawyer anymore. She looked like an executioner. She did not shout, and she did not pace. She simply pressed a button on her remote, and a large digital diagram appeared on the projection screen for the jury to see. It was a flowchart. It was simple, brutal, and undeniable. At the top was a box labeled Benjamin West Trust. An arrow pointed down to a box labeled Richard West Personal Account. From there, the line split. One arrow went to Westlake Urban Development. The other went to a box that made the jurors gasp. Dylan West Tuition, Villanova University. And below that, a final arrow pointed from Westlake Urban Development to an entity labeled Riverside School District Athletic Fund. Ava turned to the jury. This is not a story about a family dispute, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. This is a map of theft. We have traced every single cent. The $400,000 left for Mackenzie Perry was drained within 6 months of her grandfather's death. It went into Richard West's account. Then, $52,000 a year was paid to Villanova University for Dylan West. And the remaining balance? It was laundered through the family company and paid out as a donation to the high school exactly 3 weeks after a teacher tried to report abuse. Richard West sat frozen at the defense table. His face was the color of ash. He stared at the screen as if looking at his own autopsy. But Ava was not finished. We have heard Mr. Hales argue that the West family was merely protecting a troubled daughter, Ava continued. He claims there was no malice. He claims there was no admission of guilt. She picked up the remote again. Let us listen to what they say when they think no one is listening. She pressed play. The audio from the wire I had worn to the Silver Birch Lodge filled the room. It was crystal clear. I did what I had to do to save the company and secure the legacy. Richard's voice boomed from the speakers. filled with arrogance, and I would do it again. Then came Lorna's voice, sharp and venomous. If I hadn't stopped you, you would have wasted thousands of dollars just to fail. You should be thanking me. Nobody believes a 19-year-old girl who gets hit and just stays in the house. If it was real abuse, you would have left. The jury stared at the defense table. Lorna was gripping her purse so hard her knuckles were white. She refused to look up. Gregory Hales shot out of his chair. Objection. This recording is taken out of context. It is a private conversation regarding a settlement negotiation. It is prejudicial. Judge Thorne looked over his spectacles. The recording was obtained via a federal warrant and is corroborated by witness testimony regarding the meeting. The objection is overruled. Sit down. Mr. Hales. Ava nodded to the bailiff. The prosecution calls its final witness. She said, Ms. Sylvia Carver. The double doors opened. The sound of a motorized wheelchair whirring was the only noise in the room. Sylvia Carver was wheeled in by a federal marshal. She looked incredibly small. Her white hair was thin, and a clear tube ran under her nose, connected to a portable oxygen tank that hissed rhythmically. She looked fragile, like a dried leaf that might crumble if you touched it. But her eyes were bright blue and fierce. She was wheeled to the front of the room. The bailiff held the microphone for her. Ms. Carver, Ava said gently, do you recognize the woman sitting at the defense table? Sylvia turned her head. She looked directly at Lorna West. Lorna finally looked up, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She saw the ghost she thought she had buried. I do, Sylvia rasped. Her voice was weak, amplified by the microphone, but it was steady. That is Lorna West, the woman who stood in her kitchen and told me that her stepdaughter did not need to know about her own future. Tell us what you saw, Ava said. I saw bruises, Sylvia said. I saw a handprint on Mackenzie's arm. I saw a girl who was terrified to speak in her own home. And when I went to that house to confront them, I saw an envelope from the university hidden in an open drawer. When I tried to point it out, Lorna West locked the door and threatened to sue me. Hales stood up again. Hearsay. Your Honor, this is the memory of an elderly woman from 15 years ago. Ava held up a hand. We are not relying on memory. Your Honor, we are relying on the recording Ms. Carver made on December 12, 2009. She played the second tape, the old tape. The sound quality was grainier, filled with the hiss of magnetic tape, but the voices were unmistakable. I hold on to her records because she cannot handle them. Lorna's voice from the past said, It is less embarrassing for Richard this way. The trust fund. Well, let us just say family finances are complicated. And then, the sound of me hyperventilating in the background. The courtroom was deadly silent. The audio bridge between the past and the present was complete. The jury could hear the abuse happening in real time. Sylvia took a breath, the oxygen machine hissing. I wanted to report it, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. I wrote the report, but Principal Miller told me that Westlake Urban Development was a gold-tier sponsor. He told me to let it go or I would lose my pension. I was scared, so I let it go. Ava walked to the evidence table and picked up a single piece of paper sealed in plastic. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. Ava said, This is an email recovered from the Westlake server, dated 2 days after Ms. Carver was transferred. She projected the email onto the screen. From Principal Miller to Richard West. Subject, resolved. Richard, the Carver complaint has been handled internally. She has been transferred. The file is closed. Please expedite the check for the stadium renovation. The board is expecting the $200,000 by Friday. $200,000, Ava said. Turning to the jury, the exact price of a 19-year-old girl's life, the exact price of her silence. They didn't just abuse her. They bought the system to make sure she couldn't scream. Ava sat down. Judge Thorne was staring at the email on the screen. His face was hard as stone. He turned his gaze to Richard West. Mr. West, the judge said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the windows rattle. Do you deny that you used funds from a trust specifically designated for your daughter to pay this bribe? Richard stood up. He looked around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a friendly face. He found none. Hales tried to grab his arm to sit him down, but Richard pulled away. I needed the contract, Richard stammered. The stadium project. It was going to save the company. I was going to pay Mackenzie back. I swear, it was just business. Business? The judge repeated, his voice dripping with ice. You stole your daughter's inheritance to bribe a public official to cover up domestic abuse, and you call that business? It wasn't abuse. The scream came from Lorna. She had leaped to her feet, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. Her composure had finally snapped. She was ungrateful, Lorna shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. She was a leech. We gave her a roof over her head, and she moped around like a victim. She didn't deserve that money. Dylan deserved it. Dylan was smart. Dylan was grateful. She was just a waste of space. She never deserved it. The courtroom erupted. The bailiff moved toward Lorna. Hales put his head in his hands. Lorna stood there, heaving, her chest rising and falling. The silence that followed her outburst was absolute. She had just confessed to the motive. She had just shown the jury exactly who she was. I looked at her. I did not feel fear anymore. I did not feel anger. I felt nothing but a cold, clean sense of finality. Judge Thorne banged his gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. Sit down, Mrs. West, the judge ordered. He looked at the jury. The jurors were not looking at each other. They were looking at the West family with expressions of open disgust. They didn't even need to leave the room. I am ready to render a judgment, Judge Thorne said. This is a bench trial regarding the civil claims, and I have heard enough. He adjusted his robes. The evidence is overwhelming, he began. The defendants, Richard and Lorna West, engaged in a systematic conspiracy to defraud the plaintiff, Mackenzie Perry. They misappropriated federal trust funds. They falsified educational records. They engaged in bribery and corruption of a public school official, and, perhaps most heinously, they inflicted psychological and physical abuse on a dependent adult to maintain control over those assets. Richard sank into his chair. Lorna stared straight ahead, her eyes glassy. I am ordering the full restitution of the Benjamin West Trust, adjusted for 15 years of interest and market growth, totaling $850,000, Judge Thorne ruled. Furthermore, I am awarding punitive damages in the amount of $2 million for emotional distress and willful malice. He paused. Additionally, I am referring this entire evidentiary record to the United States Attorney and the District Attorney for immediate criminal prosecution regarding wire fraud, embezzlement, bribery, and assault. I am freezing the assets of Westlake Urban Development pending the criminal investigation. He looked at Richard. You said you did it to save your legacy. Mr. West, you have destroyed it. And you, Mrs. West, the judge said, turning to Lorna, you said no one would believe a 19-year-old girl. You were wrong. We believe her. Case closed. The gavel came down. The room exploded into noise. Reporters were shouting questions. Federal agents were moving toward the defense table to take Richard and Lorna into custody for the new criminal charges. I stood up. My legs felt light. I looked at Ava. She was smiling, a tired but genuine smile. We did it, she said. I turned to look at the back of the room. Sylvia Carver was sitting in her wheelchair, weeping silently. She raised a trembling hand and gave me a thumbs up. I walked toward the aisle. As I passed the defense table, a federal marshal was clicking handcuffs onto Lorna's wrists. She looked up at me. Her face was stripped of all its vanity. She looked old. She looked pathetic. Mackenzie, she whispered, please. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I walked right past her as if she were a piece of furniture. I walked past Richard, who was weeping into his hands. I walked to the back of the room and placed my hand on Sylvia's shoulder. Thank you, I whispered. She patted my hand. Go, she said. Walk out that door. I pushed through the double doors and into the hallway. The press was waiting. A wall of cameras flashed, blinding and bright. Microphones were thrust into my face. Ms. Perry, do you have a statement? How do you feel about your parents being arrested? Is it true about the bribery? I stopped on the steps of the courthouse. The cold Cleveland air hit my face, smelling of snow and exhaust. It smelled like freedom. I looked into the camera lens. I thought about the girl who sat on the kitchen floor picking up broken glass. I thought about the woman who had scrubbed floors for 7 years. Stepmother beat me and hid my report cards. Then a teacher came to the house. I said, my voice steady and clear, that is how it started. I thought the story ended at that door 15 years ago. I thought silence was the end. But the truth is water. It always finds a crack. It always finds a way into the light. And today, the truth finally found its way into court. I turned and walked down the steps, leaving the chaos behind me. I did not look back. I had a life to live. And for the first time in 15 years, it belonged entirely to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story on the Lila Revenge Stories channel. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please leave a comment down below sharing your location and your thoughts on Mackenzie's victory. And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe, like the video, and hit the hype button so we can share this journey with even more people.